Good morning. Ready for the jury?
State's ready. Yes, sir. Bench ready.
You can bring the jury. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Day number 13, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it Agent Fletcher or Miss Fletcher?
Miss Fletcher is fine.
Are you an agent?
Technically, I am commissioned. However,
Okay.
I'm a forensic scientist.
Right. Okay. Well, Ms. Fletcher, just want to go over a little bit of what you testified about yesterday and hit some smaller points. But you pretty much, you said this yesterday, but gunshot primer residue is not biodegradable, correct?
No, sir. They're composed of heavy metals of lead, barium, and antimony. So they're individual particles of those metals. They are not biodegradable.
So if gunshot primer residue is on a surface, it will stay on that surface and will not degrade for hundreds of years.
Potentially, there's not studies that go out that far, but potentially.
Right. But the only way that current science knows to get primer gunshot residue off of anything is through cleaning, wiping it off, scrubbing it off, spraying it off. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And it comes out when a gun is shot, right?
Yes, that's how gunshot primer residue is formed. It comes out through the muzzle and in a semi-automatic through the ejector port or through a revolver through the muzzle gap. So any opening within the gun, it'll come out.
Yeah, so the gunshot primer gunshot primer residue will follow the projectile, whether it's pellets or a bullet, out the barrel of the gun, rifle, or pistol, will it not?
Yes, sir, it will.
And then if you have a semi-automatic rifle or shotgun, gunshot primer residue will go follow the discharge cartridge or shell shot as it opens up, right?
Yes, sir. Studies have shown as far as about 60 feet. Beyond that, they haven't been studied.
Okay. So within 60 feet of a gun being shot, there will be gunshot primer residue on whatever's around there. Fair enough?
Whatever's around the bullet, per se.
Okay.
When it gets out that far, it's more in the immediate vicinity of the bullet.
But for sure, gunshot primer residue will accumulate on the firearm that's being used, will it not?
Yes, sir, it will.
And if it's not properly cleaned and maintained, I mean, it'll stay there until it gets wiped off by someone's hand or left out in the rain or sprayed off, right?
Yes, sir, it will.
Okay. And when you were referring to transfer GSR, is that one of the things you're referring to?
Yes, sir. If you touch a gun that had been fired at any point, then you have the potential to transfer it to your hands.
Now, this jury has seen throughout the course of the trial a number of folks holding up some firearms that are in evidence. A couple of shotguns, 300 blackout, and they've seen they've seen witnesses hold up. Mr. Meadows held up yesterday this blue rain jacket, which you had identified having 38 particles or more on it. My question to you is it very possible that where you're sitting right now, there's gunshot primer residue?
That is a possibility, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you did some, you work in the Forensic Services Laboratory at SLED, correct?
Correct.
And there's a trace evidence operation manual pertaining to gunshot primer residue analysis, correct?
Yes, sir, there is.
And that governs you follow that manual, do you not?
Yes, I do.
And you agree with the statement that gunshot primer residue evidence is most probative in the following situations: from subjects who have not sustained a gunshot wound, from subjects who have not been in the proximity to the discharge of a firearm or admitted to discharging a firearm, and from subjects who were not found in the possession of a firearm.
I do agree with that, yes, sir.
And that's a statement of your operations manual.
Yes, sir, it is.
And you obtain clothing, which we know is from Richard Alexander Murdaugh, shirt, shorts, and shoes. And did someone under your supervision did lifts from those clothing items so that you could analyze the particles, correct?
Yes, sir. Jamie Hall collected the particle lifts off of those items.
And those and that collection was done on June 8th, I believe, was it not?
Yes, sir, it was.
And are you aware that the clothes were collected on June the 8th?
Yes, sir, I was.
And were you aware that when the clothes were collected, they were wet?
I didn't know that they were wet until Jamie opened up the evidence, and it was evident that the shirt was a little damp and the shoes were definitely damp.
And so it's just been a few hours that they have been placed in some sort of bag, and you open it up and they're wet, and you smell laundry detergent.
That's correct.
Okay. Were you aware it had been raining that evening at Moselle?
I was not aware of that, no, sir.
In any event, you tested after Ms. Hall, is that it, Jamie Hall?
Yes, sir.
She did the lifts, and you located 3 particles from the white shirt.
Yes.
You were at 3 particles from the shorts.
Yes.
No particles from the shoes.
Yes.
And there was no particles on Mr. Murdaugh's hands.
There was one particle on his right hand.
I'm sorry, there was 1 particle on his hand. And you would agree that that amount of primer residue, gunshot primer residue found on an individual who you had been informed had a firearm in his hand when the police arrived, that it was consistent with the transfer from a firearm.
When I analyzed the evidence, I did not know that he had a firearm in his hand, but that would be consistent with somebody who had a firearm in his hand prior to collection.
Okay. Well, you learned that at least by June the 9th at 11:03 a.m. when you had a telephone call with Agent Owen, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you told him that that amount of gunshot residue would be consistent with the transfer from a firearm.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you stand by that here today?
I do.
Now, the seatbelt assembly, let's talk about that for a minute. You did lists, you and Ms. Hall, or Agent Hall, did lists of the buckle, is that right?
Yes, sir.
The latch plate, is that right?
Yes.
And then 3 spots along the belt, the webbing.
Yes, sir. 3 areas along the belt. We divided the belt into 3 sections and did both sides of it, and those were the 5 areas that we collected.
I see. So did you take lists from the entire webbing?
Yes, sir. We retracted it as far as it would go, divided it into 3 sections,
I see.
and collected them.
And the results of the lifts, and you did analysis, was there's 1 particle on the buckle, right?
That's correct.
0 on the latch plate.
Correct.
0 on the belt, on any of the sections of the belt.
That's correct.
So the whole belt was 0. And so they found 1 particle.
I confirmed 1 particle on the buckle. Yes, sir.
And you can't say how or when the particle was deposited on the belt, can you?
I cannot.
And I think you told this to Agent Owen that if Alex Murdaugh was shooting earlier in the day or anytime, at some point in time while he had that vehicle, and he got after shooting, he got in the vehicle that has the ability to transfer any gunshot residue primer to that vehicle, right?
Yes, sir. I cannot tell you when that particle was deposited.
So if he had had that vehicle for 2 years and he'd been out shooting and got in it, it could have deposited 1 particle on the buckle and it could stay there unless it got knocked off, right?
Yeah, unless it was cleaned, it could have stayed there. Yes, sir.
And if he went and got a gun and then put it in the car and then he got back in the car and he got transferred GSR on him and he could hit the buckle and that could put it on there, right?
Yes, sir. That could have happened.
It's just very, very small. You can't see it with a naked eye, but it stays there forever unless it's moved.
That's correct, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, you were also asked to do an analysis of a blue rain jacket. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir, I did.
And once again, just like the seatbelt, there's no way for you to know when the gunshot primer residue was deposited on the blue rain jacket.
That's correct.
It could be at any point in time from the date that blue rain jacket was manufactured, right?
Well, probably not on the manufacturer date unless they were firing
Right.
guns in the manufacturing plant, but any time after a consumer takes possession, probably.
So if a consumer took possession of that garment 4 years ago, and we're going to talk about how you can get gunshot primer residue on it, but unless it's cleaned off or washed off, it'll stay for 4 years.
It could, yes.
And you have no idea how gunshot primer residue ended up on that garment, correct?
I cannot tell you how it got there
Okay. Or when it got there.
or when it got there.
Or whether it was being worn when it got there, whether it was being worn inside out when it was deposited on there, or whether it was laid on top of a gun, for example.
I cannot tell you any of those scenarios.
Okay. So if Mr. Randolph Murdaugh, are you aware that this rain jacket was found in a closet in September of 2021 at Mr. Randolph Murdaugh's home?
That was the information that was on the submission, yes.
And he died, I think, on June 10th, 2021. Were you aware of that?
I remember hearing news about it.
But if he, before he got into his truck, had taken off this poncho and flipped it over and threw it on the back seat of his truck where he kept his shotgun bow whoop, and it laid on top of this dirty old shotgun, it could have deposited 38 particles of gunshot primer residue, right?
If the shotgun was not clean, there is a potential for the transfer off of that shotgun, yes.
And if the the bow whoop hadn't been cleaned in years, there would be
No objection. What's he saying?
bow whoop, B-O-W-H-O-O-P, the name of Mr. Randolph Murdaugh's shotgun. If that shotgun hadn't been cleaned in years, it'd be more likely you would get gunshot residue deposited on anything that came on top of it, right?
The transfer would be more likely, yes, sir.
Now, you also testified that 38 particles of gunshot primer residue was a significant amount. You
Yes,
remember
sir.
saying that?
Yes, sir.
So I guess then you would agree with me that one particle on the hand is an insignificant amount.
I can just say that it was present. I can't tell you that it's insignificant. It's just there.
Yet you can say 38 is significant.
Because it's much more than you would expect on an item that wasn't in the vicinity or didn't come into contact with an object with gunshot primer residue on it. One particle, I can't tell you when or how or it got there.
Well, would you agree with 3 particles on a shirt is an insignificant amount?
It's just 3 particles on a shirt, and it can be one of the 2 ways, or a combination of the 2 ways of being in the vicinity or transfer.
Yet you're comfortable saying 38 is significant, but you're not comfortable saying 1 is insignificant.
Insignificant implies that the evidence itself is insignificant, but it's a particle of gunshot primer residue. I'm not going to say that it's insignificant evidence.
Well, should you say 38 is significant, or do you say there's 38 particles on there?
Significant implying that it's a large amount, not that it's a small amount, but a large amount.
So is 3 a small amount?
Not in how many that we get normally. It's about average.
Okay. Now, in addition to the rain jacket, and I think that is item 173 in your lab, you were also provided a blue tarp, item 174. Do you remember receiving a blue tarp?
Yes, sir.
And after discussing the scenario presented by the witness with Captain Ryan Neal, you and he decided that there was no need to process the blue tarp seized from Almeida, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware that this witness was Shelley Smith?
I am now. I was not aware who the witness was at the time.
So in your conversation with Agent Ryan Neal, he says, don't worry about the tarp.
Objection to hearsay.
The objection is sustained.
After your conversation with Ryan Neal about what a witness had relayed to him, you, in consultation with Agent Neal, decided not to test the tarp.
That's correct. That was based on that the raincoat was balled up in a closet versus the tarp being folded in a container and in place in a location.
When you say balled up, what do you mean?
I wasn't there, so I don't know, but that was the information. It was haphazardly placed in the bottom of the closet.
Okay. If it had been folded and placed on top of some other items in the closet, would that have made a difference to you?
I'm not sure. That would have had to have been a discussion between the agents and my management.
Have you seen all the photos of the search warrant where it was found and how it was folded or not folded, balled or not balled?
I've seen one photo.
Okay. The one that's in evidence here?
I'm not sure.
You were informed from Agent Neal that, or you concluded that the supposition was that the firearm was in contact with the rain jacket, correct?
I'm sorry?
You documented that the supposition was that the firearm was in contact with the rain jacket.
They were trying to determine, I think, whether a firearm was in contact with the rain jacket, and that was a possibility given my results.
Now, you, so, do you remember what you did with the blue tarp? You put it in storage and it's never been taken out again, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I don't know what happened to the blue tarp.
Did you ever have any involvement with the blue tarp after it was presented to your evidence lab?
No, I did not.
The rain jacket did. Do you know if fingerprints were taken off the rain jacket?
I don't know of any other analyses performed on the rain jacket.
Would you have been able to tell if there had been lifts for fingerprints when it came to you?
For gunshot primer residue evidence, the trace lab always gets it first because any other processes might remove the gunshot primer residue, so no other analyses would have taken place prior to ours.
The rain jacket was slated, I believe you testified, for further DNA analysis.
That was what was on the outside of the box, yes, sir.
And because of that, you and Agent Jamie Hall wore gloves and a gown and a mask, right?
We always wear gloves and the lab jacket, but the mask was added because of the DNA request.
Do you know the results of the DNA analysis?
I do not.
You were shown photos that were introduced in the evidence and of the rain jacket. And I just want to publish two more that were introduced in evidence. 438. Doug, can you put 438 on the screen, please? I think you had it, now it's gone. There we go. Agent Fletcher, can you see that?
I can.
What's that?
This is a page out of my case file that I prepared for my technical reviewer and as part of my information to keep with me. It's a picture of the packaging, the paper bag that the rain jacket was included in, with the documentation on it, as well as the tag from the rain jacket labeling the brand of it, the size of it, and it also has our lab net information and the initials and date in which it was analyzed by the trace department.
Okay, the bottom of this, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a date of 10/8/2021. Is that when you took the photo?
No, sir, that's when I prepared the PowerPoint for inclusion in my case file.
I see. So Doug, you'll go to the next exhibit, 439, please. And there you've labeled manufacturer's tags. You see that?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the jury what size this rain jacket is?
It's a large.
Okay. And do you know this brand name? Kokatat?
I had to look it up. I wasn't familiar with it prior to this case.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Doug. You take that down, please. One second, Your Honor, please. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Good morning.
Mr. Griffin asked you about 38 particles on the parka, poncho, rain jacket, the blue garment.
Yes, sir.
You asked about the 38 particles. That's what I'm responding to.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Okay, well, I'll talk louder, sorry. Actually, how many particles were on the garment?
In total, there were 52 particles. There were 14 that I confirmed on the outside of the rain jacket, and there were 38 on the interior of the rain jacket.
And I confused myself yesterday. There were 13 particle lifts and 12 particle lifts, correct? And then out of that, you found the 52 particle characteristics of gunshot primer residue, correct?
That's correct.
And 38 of those were on the inside?
Yes, sir.
That's what he asked you about. 14 were on the outside.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you wear that garment, do you typically wear it insides inside? Is that what it means?
I would think so.
Yeah. And he asked you, is it a possibility that a firearm would come in contact with the rain jacket? And you said it's possible, it's really possible, isn't it? I mean, those numbers are unusual, aren't they? 38.
For the interior of a garment, I would think that they were unusual, yes.
And that's common sense, isn't it?
Well, they're just not,
What is it? I'm sorry. How do you describe that in your world, everyday living, and then you're examining it? How do you describe those particles inside of a garment that you're supposed to wear with the outside?
well, typically people wear their clothing right side out, and so if they're in the vicinity to the discharge of a shooting, that's where the particles are going to land.
On the outside?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Griffin asked you about, I think, a hypothetical if Scranton's father's gun had laid on it and it was in a truck, would the 38 particles inside of the rain jacket be consistent with a recently fired firearm being contained inside?
It could be, yes.
With a recently fired firearm being carried inside of that rain jacket?
Just inside the rain jacket, I don't know that it matters if you're carrying it.
Okay, right. You're very technical and precise. Okay. But if you were carrying it and you had a gun inside that rain jacket that had recently been fired, and you were taking it somewhere to hide it or transport it, would the 38 particles inside the rain jacket be consistent with transfer from a recently fired firearm?
That is a possibility, yes, sir.
And again, how did you describe those 38 particles in your world?
They're unusual because they're on the interior of a garment.
Go ahead.
And it is a large number.
Unusual because they're on the interior of a garment, and an unusual number.
Well, a large number.
Object.
The last answer for the record was a large number.
Yes, sir.
Further examination.
Very, very briefly, Agent Fletcher, what I gather, there's just a whole lot of possibilities of what could have happened, right?
That's correct.
And the only thing you can tell us is what you saw under a microscope.
Yes, sir.
You can't tell the jury how it got there, right?
That's correct.
Or when it got there.
That's correct.
And, okay, and I forgot to ask one further question. A rim-fired gun, does it produce gunshot primer residue?
Rimfire ammunition does produce gunshot primer residue. Some don't produce the traditional lead, barium, and antimony. Others do. It just depends on what type of ammunition is used.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Annette Griswold.
My name is Annette Griswold, Griswold.
Ms. Griswold, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, thank you.
Good. If you would, just tell the jury a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and what you do for a living, please.
Okay. I grew up in Hampton, South Carolina, and lived there for the first 18 years of my life, graduated from Wade Hampton High School, went away for college at 18, ended up falling in love with the Charlotte, North Carolina area. Over the next 2 decades, I spent most of that time in Charlotte. That's where I got married, and with the exception of a few years coming back to Hampton and a few years in Columbia for my husband to get his degree, that time was spent in Charlotte until 2012. My dad took ill, and he wanted us to move closer to be near him, and my mom needed help taking care of him. So I moved home in 2012 after my father passed away. A few months after, I went back on the job search, and I'd been out of work for 2 months helping my mom. So I was looking for a job and ran into my friend's father, and he told me I should probably check the law firm. I found out that I had a school friend that worked there, so I reached out to her, sent her my resume, and she forwarded it to the right people, and 3 interviews later, I was working for the firm, and I worked as a paralegal and was hired to work for Alex Murdaugh,
Which firm are we talking about?
What everybody refers to as PMPED.
And when did you start working there?
July of 2012.
And when you started working there, who were you working for?
Alex Murdaugh.
And the entirety of the time that you were there up until the time that he was no longer a partner in that firm, is that who you worked for?
That's correct.
So how long was that?
That was a little over 9 years.
Were you the only staff member that he had that was assigned to him?
No, we have, there's 2 of us that worked for Alex. I'd been with him, like I said, the 9 years, and then the other secretary was Christy Gerald, and she had been with him almost double of what I'd been there.
Quickly describe for me sort of the division of labor between you and Christy Gerald, please.
I was hired to handle more of the larger cases that Alex had, where it's litigation law, and so it's personal injury for the most part, workers' comp, medical malpractice, premises liability, product liability, wrongful death, trucking cases. And so he wanted me to take over those bigger cases and handle those, and then Christy did more of the day-to-day stuff and the smaller files. Still just as important, but just smaller files than the larger ones.
You had the more complex stuff,
I did.
the bigger cases?
Yes, sir.
Just quickly, how was the defendant as a boss and a lawyer? Just what were his typical work habits, and what was he like in the office?
Extremely intelligent when it comes to the law. I respected and admired that in him greatly. He didn't keep normal hours. He liked to float in later in the late morning time or early afternoon. We always had a running joke. We never knew. We knew that he might not be there all day, but he would always show up right before 5 o'clock when we were ready to leave. So just, kept unset hours. Pretty, I sometimes referred to Alex as a Tasmanian devil, because when he walked in, no matter what you were doing, you started spinning, because he was just coming through and, shouting everybody's name and ready to get work done when he was walking in the door. So it was kind of confusing.
Let me ask you just a little bit. The jury's heard some testimony about disbursement sheets and how they work. And can you just remind them very quickly how that works? Who prepares the disbursement sheets, and how does that go about taking place?
After I find out that a case is settled, I go ahead and start getting my disbursement sheet ready, where I can kind of go ahead and expect what the deductions are that are going to come out of it. The attorney's fees, the expenses. Anytime you have Medicare or any health insurance, there's typically a lien on that money, and we are required by law to pay it back. So I go ahead and start looking into all that, draft the sheet, and get everything on it that I know, that I'm aware of, and then it goes to Alex, and he makes any changes he needs to, and then once he signs off on it, I send it across to our accounts payable department, and they cut the checks.
Are you familiar with what is generally referred to as the boat case?
I am.
And that is the boat wreck that occurred around February of 2019.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that the defendant was sued civilly in that particular case?
Yes, sir.
After the boat case happened, did you notice any change in the defendant's demeanor around the office and about his work habits?
I did. He was more distant. Even when he was in the office, he was absent. It was hard to, he's always been hard to sit still and get answers from and to sign our documents and anything that we had put in his office to sign, but it got extremely worse after the boat accident. He was rarely there, and when he was, the door was closed, and it was almost impossible for us to reach him. He was always on his phone. He was always dealing with something bigger than what we had going on.
As time moved on into the early part of 2021, did that even get worse?
It did. He would come in lots of times, and he was just not his normal self or what his normal self used to be. It was just very tense, and I don't know how to describe it. It's just, you could tell that it was the boat crash was weighing heavy on him, and it was consuming his life almost, it seemed like, and he was just harder to reach. And there was a couple instances where I referred to him as having his ass on his shoulders, because that's how I felt. It was disrespectful of me to feel that way and to say that out loud, but that's how I felt, because he just wasn't himself with us anymore. He came in and it was just like yelled our names and just didn't treat us the same way he did prior to the boat accident.
Was the defendant very protective about anyone going into his office?
He was. There was often times where he would come in on a Monday and say, "Who's been in my office?" And we'd be like, "I don't know, probably the cleaning ladies." We have no idea. He was, it was very cluttered, very unorganized, but he said he knew where his stuff was, that it was organized in his way.
Jury's heard a lot of testimony about this, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask it this way. Over the years, in various cases, did the defendant ask you to put disbursements to Forge on various disbursement sheets so that settlement checks would be prepared from the trust account made out that way?
Yes, sir, he did. I can't remember when it started, but he told me, to put it on Forge, and me knowing Forge Consulting was a legitimate company, I would, on the disbursement sheet, I would put Forge Consulting, and he would say, "No, it's not Forge Consulting. If I wanted to be Forge Consulting, I would have told you Forge Consulting. I want it to be Forge." And I was like, "Well, I don't understand. Isn't the name of the company Forge Consulting?" And he told me that, he described it to me. He said, "Think of it like Forge Consulting is the large company, and Forge is a kind of under that umbrella of it." So he said Forge Consulting is the big name, and then you have all different things they do, including Forge, which is more like a savings account than a trust.
So he would actually get you to change it from Forge Consulting to just Forge?
Correct. Even when across the street at the accounts payable department, they would write the check out to Forge Consulting, lots of times I would have to reach out to them and say, "Hey, you wrote this to Forge Consulting. He says it needs to be Forge." And so lots of times they would have to change that.
Those checks that he would have on disbursement sheets to get cut, made out to Forge, would he often talk to you about picking those up personally?
Yes, I would ask him if I could go ahead and mail it to Michael Gunn at Forge Consulting, because he was our contact. And he would say, "No, you know what? I'm seeing Gunn this weekend. He's coming out to the farm, or we're going to meet halfway tonight and have dinner." He always said that he was going to hand deliver it. So I even got to where I would make file notes in my files, "Alec took check to hand deliver," because I was so worried that he was going to lose these checks. Because he was, a little aloof sometimes, and, would leave keys in his vehicle, would misplace a few things. And so I was so worried that these checks were going to get lost, and then we would have to do a stop payment and reissue the check. So I started making notes where I would remember that I didn't mail it, that it was actually hand delivered.
Well, hand delivered, at least from who was telling you it was going to be
That's
hand
correct.
delivered.
Yes.
Who was saying that?
Alec was.
All right, when you're talking about the defendant or Alex Murdaugh, do you see him here in the courtroom today?
I do.
Can you point him out to the jury, please?
Yes, he's over in the, it looks like a navy blue jacket.
Your Honor, can the record reflect she's identified the defendant? You mentioned he would say that, I'm going to see Gunn, I'm meeting him halfway, we're going hunting, things like that. Can you tell the jury again who's Michael Gunn?
Michael Gunn he's our contact. He's the person we talk to when it comes to trust annuities with Forge Consulting.
And that's the real Forge, correct?
That's correct,
Not the fake Forge.
not the fake Forge.
Moving into the latter part of 2020, did you have any particular issue arise with a disbursement to Forge that caught your attention?
I did.
Tell me about that if you would, please.
I was currently working from home. I had surgery on Halloween of 2020, and I was working from home, hadn't come back yet. I was planned to come back to the office the following Monday, and on that day, I believe it was December 15th of 2020, I got a phone call from the accounts payable department. Nicole called me, and she's one of the ladies that cuts the checks and works for Jeannie Seckinger. And she told me that she had just got a disbursement sheet over, that Christy had sent over a disbursement sheet in one of my files. It made no sense. She didn't understand it. And I was like, I was confused too, because I was like, why didn't he contact me to do my disbursement? Because I'm kind of protective over my files. If I've worked that file the whole time, I want to finish that file. I want to work the whole process of it. And actually the disbursement part is my favorite part of the file, because I want to be able to have that, be there when that client gets their money and gets that closure that they deserve. So I thought it was very odd that Christy was drafting a disbursement in one of my files, and
This was the day you were off work.
that's correct. I was working from home, and I still could have been reached, but I wasn't until Nicole reached out to me and told me.
Keep going.
She told me, so I looked, she sends it to me by email or text, I can't remember, and I reviewed it, and it didn't make sense to me either. There was a line on it that said the attorney fees were going, or amount of it was going to Forge, and I didn't understand how that was happening, and I'd never seen him send attorney fees to Forge before, and so I didn't know that that was even a possibility. And so I called the office, and Christy transferred me to Alec, and I spoke to him and asked him about it. And he said, why did Nicole call you? And I said, well, she doesn't know how to write these checks out because it doesn't make sense to her. She hasn't ever seen a disbursement like this. And he said, I'll take care of it. And so he said, I'll call Nicole, I'll take care of it. And so I remember talking to Nicole later and say, so what did he say? What was the reason behind it? And she said, he said that they can structure their attorney fees, and that's what that check was for.
Did you have a subsequent discussion with the defendant about that?
I did, and he told me the same thing. He said it was something that they've been able to do forever. He just never took advantage of it before, and so now he decided that he was going to start structuring those attorney fees where it would make interest, have interest drawn. And so it made sense, because why not? Why not, instead of having that money sit somewhere, put it somewhere where it's going to draw more money?
His explanation to you made sense.
Yes, it did.
On its face.
Yes.
Do you remember the name of that case?
That was the Hirschberger case.
I'm going to show you. Stand by. We'll show you what's already been admitted to evidence to States 429 and see if you recognize this document.
Yes, I do. This is the disbursement that was in December of 2020 that I was talking about.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Put it up on the screen. At that point in time, we're in December of 2020, is that right?
That's correct.
After the defendant gave you that explanation that seemed valid to you on your face, did that matter just kind of go away at that point in time?
It did. It was kind of, always at the back of my mind because I still felt like there should have been some kind of paper trail, but yeah, the explanation worked that he gave me, and so I was trying to just go along with it because I thought it was valid.
As we move on into January 2021, did another incident happen that came to your attention as it related to disbursements?
Yes, the end of January, it was a Friday afternoon. I left early that day to take my mom to the eye doctor, and kind of the same scenario of kind of an exact repeat of December happened again. Nicole from Accounts Payable called me, and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Well, I've got another one." And so Christy had drafted a disbursement in a case referred to as Moore, and she had sent it over, and once again it had the same wording and kind of confusion that the Hirschberger one had a month previous. So she didn't really understand it again. Still she was still trying to say, I feel like we need more information on this, and I said, I do too. And so kind of the same scenarios before. I reached out to Alec, he reached out to Nicole, and ultimately the checks got written. But it was the same scenario. As you can see on here, the $91,867.50 was attorney fees that were structured that went straight to Forge, to the fake, what we now know was the fake Forge.
All right. And is that still in the Hirschberger matter you're talking
That's
about?
the Hirschberger one, and on the Thomas More one, it
we'll
was.
get there in a second.
Okay.
When you got that call, do you remember where you were, the second call?
Yeah, the Thomas More, I was at the eye doctor with my mom.
All right, I'm still in Hirschberger. Do you remember where you were on that
Oh,
second?
I was home. I'd had surgery, and I was home recovering.
And I'm going to show you this, and we're still in the same exhibit, that being 429. Do you recognize that at all? Let me hand this exhibit to you. Probably easier that way. Just take a flip through it, if you would, please.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is what we refer to now as the second Hirschberger disbursement. It was on the UIM portion of the case and liability portion. So once again, the PMP attorney's fees were routed to Forge in the amount of $83,333.33.
All right, you had started to talk about Thomas More. Is that another incident that came to your attention as we're moving into early 2021?
Yes, sir. That one, like I said, was at the end of January. Once again, I was out of the office. I was at an eye doctor with my appointment with my mom. Got the call from Nicole. She said it's the same scenario. But this time it was all the funds that was in client's trust, which was $125,000, I believe, and all those funds were being routed. That was attorney fees and client money that was being routed to the fake Forge.
And this was another one of your cases, is that right?
It was. So another situation where I'm out of the office. It's almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. Christy drafts the disbursement. Alex signs it. They send it over in my absence.
When these instances are happening that you're describing to the jury where you happen to be out of the office, and these are your cases, right?
That's correct.
And all of a sudden you're getting communications that the defendant is having Christy draft some disbursements. In any of these cases, was there anything going on that something happened and had to be done that very day that you just happened to be out of the office?
I didn't think so because, in particular, the Thomas More case, we were working on the third-party portion of the case, but there was also a workers' comp portion that another attorney was working on. And when you're working on a workers' comp case, if you settle the third party first, you can't disperse it until the workers' comp portion is taken care of, because workers' comp always has a huge lien that you have to negotiate for the client. So the money was supposed to sit there. It was my understanding it would probably be sitting there another year until the workers' comp portion of the case was settled. So those funds didn't need to go anywhere. So it was very odd that all of a sudden they're all sent to Forge because they were supposed to remain in the account, was my understanding.
Do you take pride in the work that you do on these complex cases?
I do.
Do you know your cases very well?
I'd say I do.
And was there any reason of which you were aware that things had to be happening the day that they were?
I did. No, it definitely put up another yellow flag, and it made me think about the previous one that happened in Hirschberger in December, because both of them were kind of the same scenarios. Me out of the office, someone else drafted it, and not that we can't work in each other's files. We can, but it's easy to miss something if it's not your file. If I had to go in somebody else's file and draft a disbursement, I may not know that there's a lien or a certain promised medical bill or anything else that needs to be paid. So that's why, to me, it's easier if somebody that's worked the case actually drafts the disbursement, because they know all the deductions that have to come out.
Was the defendant using the opportunity of you being out of the office to push these things through?
Yes, in hindsight, it was easy to see that the chaos, the sending it over at 10 minutes before 5 p.m. was kind of a part of that little hurricane, a little tornado portion. Just sending it over when most people are gone, and it's just going to get done quickly and no questions asked.
You said that the Thomas More line was particularly unusual because it was workers' comp and those funds couldn't be dispersed yet, correct? To your understanding?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever have a conversation with the defendant about why these funds were dispersed?
I did, and he explained to me that he had gotten permission that since the money was going to be sitting there another year, that they were going to send it to Forge and let it draw interest, and then that would be money that would draw interest on for the client as well as the firm, because it was both portions of the money.
I'm going to show you what's already been admitted into evidence as States 328 and see if you recognize this document.
Yes, this is the Thomas More disbursement that I'm referring to, where the entire client trust amount of $125,000.
Do you recognize the signature down at the bottom of the page?
I do. Alex signed it where it says R. Alexander Murdaugh, and then where the client's signature is, that is not the client's signature. It's Alex's handwriting.
You recognize this handwriting from working for him for 9 years?
I do.
This was one of 20 parents who filed a petition against then school board president R.W. Elliott, seeking to desegregate schools in Clareton County, South Carolina. 2 of the 3 judges voted to uphold segregation and instead called for equalization of facilities in black and white schools. Briggs brought about the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, ushering in the civil rights movement. Williams built his photography career recording the 1955-56 Orangeburg economic boycotts and John F. Kennedy 1960 presidential campaign. While studying art at Claflin University in Orangeburg. After graduation in 1960, Williams opened a photo studio, which he continues to run as part.
Came in. Was that going to be PMPED or was it going to be the other attorney's
Chris
firm?
Wilson's office.
Had the firm PMPED, had it accrued costs in the course of that litigation?
Yes.
Expenses?
Yes,
And did you prepare those and send those to Chris Wilson's office, or how did that work?
I did. I put the totals in an email and sent them to, Alec wanted me to send him the totals by email, and so that's what I did. And then I guess he sent them to Chris after that.
All right. And then after
Me to send him the totals by email, and so that's what I did. And then I guess he sent them to Chris after that.
All right. And then after that happened, do you remember what month the money came in, roughly?
In May,
Well, let me slow you down. Once you've done that, when the money comes in, you said Chris Wilson's office is going to be handling that disbursement, correct?
correct.
What are you expecting to happen next?
I'm expecting copies of the settlement paperwork, copies of the disbursement sheets signed by the client, and I'm expecting 2 fee checks and 2 expense reimbursement checks, because there's 2 cases. It was a case for the deceased and a case for his wife. So I'm expecting 4 checks total.
All right. And you're about to say, and I cut you off, you said something happened in May. Did something happen related to the Ferris case in May?
Yes, I received by mail the settlement package from Chris Wilson's office, but all it contained was a cover letter and the 2 expense reimbursement checks. So I emailed Vicki Lyman, which is Chris Wilson's secretary, and said something like, "Hey girl, I got these expense checks in. When can I expect the attorney fee checks?" And she replied to my email telling me that, excuse me, "Hey friend, you know the attorney's got that money at disbursement." And I was really shocked because I didn't even know when the disbursement took place. I was never supplied copies of it or anything.
What's your thought when Vicki says that? What did you think may have happened?
Well, I called her and I said, you already gave the checks. I was like, I don't think we've received them. And she was like, yeah, they were done at disbursement in March. And so I asked her first to send me over copies of the disbursement sheets and where I could look at those. And then I reached out across to our accounts payable just to make sure that checks somehow bypassed me and went straight to into the client trust, to their department. And they told me no, that they didn't have any such checks on the books either. And I was like, okay. So I assumed that they gave Alec the checks and he's lost them. They're misplaced. They're somewhere in his truck. They're somewhere in a file folder stuck and just kind of hid away and he's forgotten to give them to me.
Did you say that to Vicki? Like, come on, why'd you give them to my boss?
Why? I said, why would you do that? I was like, why would you give checks to the attorney? Why wouldn't you send them straight to me where I can get them deposited?
I'm going to put States 312 that's already in evidence, and this is the page marked date stamp 2371 for the record up on the screen. Can you see that on your little screen? Do I need to bring that in?
I can see it.
And can you tell the jury what that is?
That is the email I was talking about where I told her I just got the expenses, but where's the fee? And she says, it's because your boss and mine and Liz's got their fees once they were signed, duh.
Did you have a conversation with Alec at this point, or what did you do next?
I did.
So you called the finance in your own firm and said, hey, did we get this check? And they
Correct.
said no.
They said no. And so I verified that, and then I asked Vicki, I said, are you positive? And she said yes. And I was like, okay, I'll go see if he remembers where they're at. So he happened to be in the office by that time. His door was closed. I went in. He was on the phone. And I kind of kept checking and going back. Eventually, I got to speak to him, and he was still kind of on the phone, but he was like, no, I didn't get those checks. And I was like, are you sure? And he said, yeah. And I was kind of back and forth. And I'm like, he said he didn't get them. Are you sure? And this kind of went back and forth for a few minutes, and over the course of the rest of the day. And I said, hey, he just told me that Chris was still holding those funds in trust. I was like, I don't understand, you say that they've been cut. I was like, can you send me copies of stuff? Because I don't see anything. And he's telling me their funds are in trust. And she was like, Annette, I know for a fact that the checks are cut. There is no money in trust. And the reason I know that is because when the checks were written to Alec, I knew it was a bit odd because they were written to Richard. They were written out to him personally instead of the firm. And I said,
they were written out to him personally instead of the firm.
Correct.
Why did that stick out in her mind? Why did that stick out in your mind?
Because common sense tells me that the attorney fees belong to the firm, where the firm, I don't know, I didn't understand the complete breakdown until Jeannie went over it in her testimony, but I knew by common sense that the funds belong to the firm, and then once they do whatever percentages and everything they need to do, then the attorney gets his portion later. So I knew it wasn't right, that it shouldn't have never gone to an individual attorney. It should go to the firm as a whole.
When you asked the defendant, said, hey, Vicky says you already got those, and he tells you what?
He told me that Chris was holding that money in trust, that it had not been dispersed yet.
Did he tell you Vicky's wrong?
Yeah, he told me Vicky's wrong. I don't care what she's telling you, she's wrong.
What was his demeanor when you were inquiring,
Just
challenging
kind of
him?
like, just shooing me out of his office, like, I don't have time for this.
After Vicky tells you that it was odd because the checks had been made out to the defendant personally instead of the law firm, what did you do next?
I asked her, I said, are you sure? And she said, yes. And she said, yeah, it was written out to him. Well, first I was like, I'm sorry, what did you say? And I made her repeat it to make sure I heard correctly. And she was like, and then kind of while she was saying it out loud, I think it kind of registered to her, oh, wait, that probably wasn't the right thing to do, because she kind of hushed after that and didn't want to talk and kind of wanted to get off the phone with me. And so I still kind of tried to question Alec over the next couple days and tried to get a reasonable explanation of what was going on, because in my mind, I'm still hoping he just lost the checks and this was all just a misunderstanding. But at the back of my mind, there's this huge red flag telling me this is not right. What is going on?
Did you eventually take this issue to anyone else since you couldn't get an answer about it?
Yes, I eventually, I don't know the exact date, but I eventually emailed Jeannie Seconder and asked her if she was in the office, because I really needed to speak to her. And she said she would be back later that day. And so I went into her office and I had everything printed out and kind of showed her and told her my concerns. And she was instantly on, excuse me, on high alert as well, because, it didn't look good. We were still both hoping that it was a misunderstanding, just this one-off, something silly that happened, but we both had that nagging feeling of, this is not good. Something is definitely wrong.
Did Jeannie instruct you to do anything?
She did not. She said that she would talk to him about it, and she kept the paperwork that I gave her.
Were you ever asked to send another email to Vicky asking for particular documents?
Yeah, actually, it was kind of my idea. I kind of told Jeannie, I was like, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't you send me an email telling me what we need, and then I'll forward that email from myself, and, to see if we can get copies of everything where we can figure all this out and eliminate it. Because, at this point, we want to prove that that suspicion we had was wrong and that everything's really okay. So she did. She forwarded me an email, and
I'm still on States 312. What's been bait stamped is 2374. And is this the email that you just described that Jeannie forwarded to you requesting the documentation for the Ferris fees?
It is. Underneath where, Jeannie texts there or emails there and tells me exactly what she needs and kind of is very specific.
At what time, what date was that, I'm sorry?
That was May 27th at 11:40 a.m.
All right. And then going over to 2373 in the same exhibit, is this the email right here that you then forwarded to Vicki Lyman at Chris Wilson's office?
Yes, it was. I forwarded that email that Jeannie sent me on the same day, May 27th. And I knew she was on vacation, but I went ahead and sent this to her. And then when I knew she had time to get back from vacation, I sent this follow-up on the Strand on June 2nd and requesting it again.
All right. And did you get a response email from Vicki Lyman in Chris Wilson's office?
Yeah, she said she didn't, this doesn't involve her, and she said she would forward it to Chris. And we were basically just asking for copies of everything where we could clear this matter up, and, like I said, we wanted our suspicion to be wrong.
item already in evidence?
I'll show you what's been marked as Exhibit 440 to your testimony. And again, just tell me, first of all, just if, without going into any content, whether or not you recognize that particular document.
I do. It's a text strand between myself and Vicki Lyman.
All right. And is this, what is the date on that particular text strand?
June 2nd, and then it runs into June 3rd.
And is that 2021?
Yes, I'm sorry, 2021.
And is this a text thread where y'all are discussing the things that you've described here today?
Yeah, I told her I just, don't mention anything.
Hold on, just real quick.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Y'all are describing what we're talking about here today?
That is correct.
All right, Your Honor, this time I would move Stage 440 into evidence.
Your Honor, object on hearsay grounds. It doesn't fall within an exception to the hearsay rule.
See the document. Sustain the objection.
Did you ultimately text Vicki on that particular day?
I did. I told her that I gave her time to get back from vacation, and I just basically texted her with my concerns and told her how stressed out I had been over this situation and how I was hoping my suspicion was wrong, but I was really stressed out. And unfortunately, my daughter, me and Vicki had talked on the phone. Vicki had called me as well, and unfortunately, my daughter had overheard me too. So she instantly got really worried for me. And my daughter said, "Mom, you need to go ahead and get your resume because once you turn all this in, they may fire you." So she was very concerned for me.
And this latest email on the screen, that was June 2nd, 2021, is that
That's
correct?
correct.
You recall June 7th, 2021.
I do.
Was that a Monday?
It was.
Were you at work that day?
I was.
Did the defendant come to work that day?
He did. He came in probably around lunchtime. I can't remember if he came in before lunch or after, but somewhere in that time frame.
Did you see Jeannie Seconder that day?
I did. Jeannie had already told me that she was going to talk to Alec about the Ferris e-checks that were missing. She was going to go and talk to him about them that day, and so she asked me to let her know when he got it to the office. So when he got to the office, I reached out to her to let her know.
And did she come up to your area?
She did, and we have open-style offices, no doors on the secretary's offices, so she had to pass by me to get Alec's office. So I saw her when she was walking past.
Did she give you any look when she walked past?
She did. It was kind of just like that, just kind of a raised eyebrow, like wish me luck, here goes nothing kind of look, like hope, because we were both just, like I said, wanting to get answers and
Get answers about what?
about those missing checks and figure out what was going on.
Where did she go after she gave you that look?
I heard Alec's doors closed, so I assumed in his office to talk to him.
This is what day?
This is June 7th, 2021.
Did she come out after?
She did, and she didn't stop. She just hurried by my desk, and she went on about her business.
Did you have any conversation yourself about the Ferris fees with the defendant that day?
I don't recall having any discussion with him on that day. At that point, I'd turned, Jeannie had everything, and it was kind of in her hands.
What time do you think you left work that day?
I left at 5:15 that day.
Is that your normal time?
It's not. I typically work later. Alec always tend to work nights, and me and Christy tend to kind of adapt his schedule a little bit and work a little later than 5 o'clock. Most of the time, we were there till 5:30, 6 o'clock.
When you left the office on June 7th, 2021 at 5:15, was the defendant still there?
He was.
Did you go home? Eventually? Eventually went home?
Yes.
Just a normal night?
Yeah, I went straight home that night.
Did that change at some point?
Yes, definitely. My phone was on silence, and I slept through a bunch of text messages and calls. I woke up in the middle of the night, and my phone was just full, and I was like, what is going on? And so I'm looking through the text messages. They don't make a lot of sense. I see I have a voicemail message from Randy Murdaugh. And so I checked the voicemail, and I could tell he was upset and crying, and he said, Annette, please call me when you can. It doesn't matter what time. And so I don't remember what time it was, but it was sometime in the middle of the night, and I called him. And he told me, well, when he answered the phone, he was upset, obviously, and I said, Randy, what's wrong? And he said, it's bad, Annette, it's real bad. And I said, oh no, Mr. Randolph passed? And he said, no, it's not Dad, it's Maggie and Paul. And I said, what? And he said, they've been shot and murdered. And I said, what? And it was very overwhelming. We both cried on the phone with each other, and you know, obviously the first thing I did was say, oh my God, how is Alec? You know, how is he? Is he okay? Where's Buster? Is Buster okay? I was very concerned. You know, I had a million thoughts running in my head. I was like, are you guys safe? You know, is this something aimed at the entire family? You know, and I was very, very worried about Alec and Buster and Randy and his family and the entire Murdaugh family. So it was very overwhelming.
Over the 9 years of working closely for the defendant, did you also get to know his family, Maggie and Paul and Buster?
I did.
Is this firm pretty tight-knit?
Yes.
What was the reaction of the people in the firm to this terrible news?
There was two reactions. First was scared. We were like, please lock our doors. You know, we're scared. Who is this aimed at? Is it a client retaliating? Is it, you know, aimed at Alec? Is it aimed at the firm? We didn't know. We just had so many questions, no answers, a million thoughts running through our heads. We were just there, you know, supporting each other and helping one another through this grieving process, and at the same time, we were very protective over Alec and Randy. We wouldn't let them leave the office if strange cars were driving around. We would say, don't walk out yet. There's a white car that's went around 3 times. I mean, we were in complete mama bear mode. We didn't want them to go out and have to talk to reporters. We didn't want them to have to run out and run into anybody, and we were scared for them. We were very protective. I mean, anything suspicious out the window, we were on high alert.
Said, what kind of mode?
Mama bear mode.
Mama bear protecting who?
Protecting Alec and Randy.
Did the law firm community rally to the aid of the defendant?
They did.
Was that the primary focus on everybody's mind in
Oh,
the aftermath?
absolutely.
Were you at all concerned about finding out what happened to these Ferris fees after that happened?
What Ferris fees?
What Ferris fees?
Yeah, what Ferris fees? That was the furthest thing on my mind.
In fact, was that the last time you really thought about it in any aspect until September of 2021?
It is, yes, sir.
And you were more focused on helping this defendant and his family in the aftermath of this tragedy that had happened.
Yes. And everybody was so supportive. I mean, some of the associate attorneys stepped up, and they came up to me and Christy and said, hey, you know, if you need anything over the next few weeks, you need us to review a file for you, get something else, sign it, and get it out the door, we're here for you guys 100%. So it wasn't, you know, we were supportive, and then we had other folks in the office that were coming up to us, supporting us as well, because they knew we were at a standstill. What do we do? You know, because we knew obviously he was not going to be the same and not be himself for quite a while.
I asked you earlier about the boat case. Before the murders, when the boat case happened, had there been some reaction and backlash in the community against the defendant and his family after the boat case?
Yes, it was very difficult because Hampton being a small town, we all know each other and we all know both sides for the most part. For instance, Mallory Beach, her father is my first cousin. So Mallory Beach, I was kind of felt like I was in between a rock and a hard place because, you know, her family is, you know, beyond heartbroken over the loss of her. And I know some of them didn't like the idea that I was still working at the firm, but I was still, to me, it was two separate entities. This is my job, this was my family, and I had to keep them separate. I didn't want any part of the boat wreck case. I didn't want to know any details or anything because, like I said, I was keeping my family life and my work life separate.
After the murders, you said the law firm community, though, rallied to Alex's aid, correct?
Absolutely, everybody.
Did the larger community do as well
Yes, they did.
after the murders?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that after those murders happened, what Ferris fees? They were the farthest thing from your mind, correct?
Yes, sir.
When did they come back to your attention?
September 2nd, it was a Thursday in the afternoon, and I was looking for a file in the file cabinet, and I was unable to locate it. And lots of times if, you know, Alex talking to a client on the phone, he'll yell for a file, and we'll take it to him. So I was like, oh, it's probably in his office. So I went to his office to look for the file, and when I found it, I picked it up, and when I did, a check kind of floated like a feather to the ground. And when I bent over to pick it up, I saw the check and what it said and had on it, and I instantly became very upset because it happened to be one of the checks from the Ferris case that didn't exist.
And what did you see on the check that let you know that stuck out in your mind?
It was from Chris Wilson's office. It was written to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, and at the bottom it said Ferris fees. And it was dated March.
So what did you realize at that point?
I said, he's been lying this whole time. He had these funds, he lied to me. Oh, that feeling in the back of my mind was correct. Unfortunately, he did take these funds because when I flipped the check over, I also saw that he had deposited by mobile deposit, and I can't remember if he signed the back of the check or if it just said mobile deposit only.
Let me show you stage 313, see if you recognize that. It's already in evidence.
Yes, sir. That's the check that I found on September 2nd.
Right. And if you flick up one side and the other side.
Yeah, it's got his signature, Bank of America deposit only.
You recognize that writing as the defendant's?
Yes, it is.
When that check fluttered down, you picked it up?
I
You
did.
saw that? Where did you take it? Did you take it anywhere?
Yeah, I went back to my desk, and you can imagine all the emotions that I was feeling at this point. You know, I was hurt, I was angry. I just was beside myself, and I was a bit enraged too, because I asked him so many times. There were so many times that I felt like we could have clarified this and got it taken care of, but here it is from March to September, and I find this check that supposedly did not exist. And so I went to my desk, I called Jeannie, and I was like, I just found something. And she said, oh, shit, what did you find? And I said, are you busy? And she said, come on over. And I went over and closed her door and threw the check at her, and she was like, is this one? I said, yeah, that's one of the Ferris checks that doesn't exist.
Was Jeannie doing anything else or start doing anything else when you came down with that check?
I didn't know it until I took her the check, but when I took her the check, she was like, yeah, I just ran a report yesterday, And she said, one of the attorneys is gonna call Michael Gunn later today. And I said, well, what do you mean? And that's when she told me that she thinks there's some more stuff too. Back to my suspicion with Hirschberger and Thomas More, she pulled a report and she found out that we may have other issues of stolen funds. But I was not aware of any of that. I didn't know that she was looking into it again. I didn't know any of that until I took her the check and she said she had just started doing stuff within the last few days.
Within a few days of this happening, what happened to the defendant's employment at the law firm?
He was fired the next day.
And did the law firm engage in a review process to determine the extent of any alleged?
Yes, we've had months, months upon months of going through all of the files and finding, just following the numbers and making notes on everything, and lots of hours, lots of manpower involved in this process of putting everything together, and just in awe of how much was happening, and we had no idea about it.
And without going through all the exhibits that were gone through with Jeannie Seckinger, but she was the one, or one of the central ones in doing that review, is that correct?
Of course, yes.
And without going through each one, is a lot of those disbursements for the fake Forge account, those were disbursements that the defendant told you to put on there?
That's correct.
Are those a lot of those disbursements one where he corrected you and said, no, don't put Forge Consulting, put Forge?
Yes, they were.
A lot of those checks, ones where he said, oh, I'm going to see Michael Gunn later, I'll take the check myself.
Yeah, they were all for him.
Show you what's been marked as Exhibit 441. Again, without going into the contents, tell me if you recognize that document.
Yes, this text message that Alex sent to me and Christy on September 26th, when he was in 2021, when he was in rehab, is my understanding.
All right. Your Honor, this time I'd offer States 441 into evidence, I believe without objection.
No objection.
Submitted without objection.
Your Honor, I apologize. We do have the 403 objection, and subject to the court's prior ruling on this.
I haven't seen the exhibit, I don't.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll have you go to the jury room for a break. Please do not discuss the case. Yes, sir, Mr. Griffin.
just preserving our prior objections on 404B evidence under 404B and 403. And this, it's nothing new. I just forgot to state no additional objections than what we've already had in this line of testimony, which is this is the same line of testimony of financial misconduct. That's all.
Mr. Waters?
And I just clarified, I think, with defense counsel that he was not adding a specific 403 objection to that. It's just the prior objection. However, this is a text from the defendant to this witness in this particular instance. Certainly, it can be read, and there's no hearsay issue because obviously it's a statement of a party opponent, and it certainly also is relevant because it can certainly be read in the nature of an admission to the various things that are at issue in these particular proceedings. And for that reason, there's certainly the probative value of an admission is certainly, I would argue, is the probative value of that is not substantially outweighed by the danger of any unfair prejudice.
It introduces another issue, the issue of drug use, and I think the witness testified that he was in rehab. Is that what you said? That he was in rehab and sent an email, and just want to be clear from the defense that the part of it, of the testimony that establishes through this witness that he was in rehab, that is not a basis for your objection.
We do have, yes, we do object to evidence of his drug use and to be included in this, and we would ask that that document be redacted to the extent it references rehab at this time.
It doesn't specifically mention drug use. So, have you all review the exhibit and tell me if you have no objection based on the fact that he sent it while in rehab, then it's admissible as far as your prior bad acts objection.
We don't have any additional objections, Your Honor. We would, because this does raise an additional character issue asked of the court. We ask that the court give, additional limiting instruction at some point in time about that.
How does the character in that he saying he's getting better, or what part addresses character?
Certainly he says I'm getting better every day, and I mean, that's clear from that he's in rehab. I mean, that's all.
All right, Mr. Waters.
Your Honor, I mean, he doesn't expressly say that. I would point out that the issue of pills has already come up a few times in this trial. I'm not trying to go there, but it is, when we talk about 404 and res geste, it is kind of part and parcel of a lot of things. I mean, even the defense has examined, I believe, Ms. Seckinger on the issue of pills. And on top of that, we had Chris Wilson, who testified in camera, who will also testify here today. One of the things he says when he had that confrontation with the defendant on the the afternoon, I believe, of September 4th, that the defendant said, yeah, I've been stealing money and I've been hooked on pills for a while. So this is a bridge I think we have to cross at some point. The state is not trying to gild the lily with that, but at least with these various witnesses, it is part of what they're being said. As far as that specific exhibit, though, Your Honor. There's no express reference to drugs or anything like that, and it certainly is in the nature of admission. And again, I think for that reason, it's very probative and very relevant and admissible for that reason.
Well, my concern obviously is that we do not, or that I do not allow testimony involving these admissions to bleed so far into the character 403 that it has the effect of undoing the 404 analysis. A lot of testimony has come in unobjected to that touches upon the defendant's character. That's why I want to be clear on what the objection is.
Your Honor, just from the state's perspective, we are trying to, walk that line. I mean, there's a lot of the financial stuff we're not even seeking to admit. I think that we've limited it to things that had that connection that we discussed in camera. So, I'm not trying to gild the lily.
I'm not sure what that means.
That's a phrase I learned from Chief Justice Toll over the years. I guess that means piling on, I guess, is a way to do that. And again, I don't have, we recognize the situation we're in and trying obviously not to get out over our skis from what the admissibility of, that the court has already ruled on.
I'll ponder it while we take our break, and we'll be in recess for about 15 minutes. Ma'am, you may step down. Do not discuss your testimony.
seated.
All right, to this exhibit number 441, I find that it is admissible under Rule 801 by a party opponent. However, the portion of it that says, when I get out of here is problematic. If the defense would like that portion of it redacted, that would suggest that he's in rehab and when he gets out of here, he's going to do this or that. We can redact that portion. If the defense does not wish to have that portion redacted, the exhibit will come in its entirety.
Your Honor, here's where we find ourselves on the defense side. His drug addiction and drug use is frankly res gestae to the alleged criminal conduct on the financial fraud. And it's hard for us on the defense side, and it didn't really get flushed out in our in-camera hearing because they didn't put evidence up of this, but it's something that we all knew. But it is part and parcel of the financial crimes, and it explains why he did what he did. And it does, in a way, pile on and make it even more prejudicial. And so when considering that, Your Honor, what we would ask is we want to renew our motion, object to all the financial crimes. Now that we know drug use is coming in the midst of it, because it is res gestae, it does tell the entire story, and we would ask the court to strike all the financial testimony the court's heard thus far, and let's proceed with a murder trial.
Well, that motion is denied.
Thank you.
But the portion, the court admits this document and will redact that portion if requested by the defense. Do you want to redact the portion that suggests that he was in rehab? You says it's part of the res gestae. It may even be part of your defense. I don't know. The state is offering evidence, and
We're not asking it to be redacted. We would request that whenever we get in these 404B witness testimony that the court provide a limiting instruction. Thank you.
well, I'm not going to give a limiting instruction prior to every witness's testimony or in the middle of every witness's testimony. The court has given the limiting instruction twice and will do so at the end of the case as well. And there may be other instances, but not at every juncture where evidence is being offered.
Yes, sir.
All right, so this exhibit is admitted. You may bring the jury. Thank you. The objection is overruled. The exhibit is admitted.
May it please the court, Your Honor. Just very quickly, when we left off States 441, now admitted into evidence, this was a text you received from the defendant, is that right?
That's correct.
And the date on that is September 26th?
September 26th, yes.
Is that 2021?
It is.
Is this the text of, that text that the defendant sent to you?
It is.
I only have a couple more questions for you. Before I get to the end, one question I wanted to ask you was, what was the defendant's cell phone usage like?
He was always on his phone, always on his cell phone, always on his office phone. He would quit one conversation and grab another. Sometimes he would have both phones to his ear.
Would it be unusual for the defendant to go anywhere without a cell phone with him?
Absolutely.
I want to play for you what's been admitted to evidence as States 297. Can I have the this input, please?
Get it. Get that. Quit, Cash. Quit. It's okay. Come here. Come here. Post it. Cash. Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth. Hey, Bubba. It's a guinea. This is a chicken. Come here, Cash. Come on, Cash. Quit.
Do you recognize any voices in that video?
I do. I hear three voices.
And tell me who you hear.
I hear Paul Murdaugh, Maggie Murdaugh, and Alex Murdaugh.
And how sure are you?
I'm 100% sure.
Can I have the Elmo one more time, please?
I'm sorry. Oh.
Going back to States 441, can you read just that one sentence starting where my finger's pointing that the defendant sent to you?
The worst part is knowing I did the most damage to those I love the most.
Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Good morning.
Ms. Griswold, were you hired by Alec to work at the law firm?
I was hired by the firm, but he was in one of the meetings and it was my understanding that I was going to be working for him.
Right. And so you interviewed with him?
I did.
And you've been working, well, you worked with him for?
About 9 years.
9 years.
Yes, sir.
And 1 second, I left my. My understanding is that you. Moved back to Hampton because your you had, your father was ill?
My father was ill, yes, sir.
And then, so you moved your family back, you and your husband, and
Right, my husband and my daughter and I moved to be closer to my dad and help my mom with him.
and you got a job working at the law firm, and did you work exclusively for Mr. Alex Murdaugh?
Most, yes. I mean, there was other attorneys that I might do some work for here and there, but primarily Alec was who my attorney was.
And if you needed to take time off for personal matters, would you just have to run it by Alex?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And he put family first at work, did he not?
Most of the time, yes,
And he encouraged you to put your family first.
absolutely.
And I think your your husband had a heart attack. He was in the hospital for quite some time.
Yes, for 5 weeks before he ultimately passed away.
And I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
But Alec encouraged you to do all you needed to do to care for him and don't worry about work. Isn't that right?
Yes, he did.
And you didn't miss a paycheck.
I sure didn't.
Is he a good person to work for?
It was hit or miss. I cared about him. I respected him. I loved him. You know, you can't be that close and work with somebody without having, developing feelings for them and their family members.
Right.
But it was hard to work for him sometimes. He was a bit erratic, and for all the respect and love I had for him, it was still very difficult to work for him.
I think your description was he was like a Tasmanian devil that would come through at the end of the day,
He would.
and he was frenetic.
Yes.
Okay, and but people came to him if they needed something, right?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
And so he had a lot of people coming, and did he ever say no to anybody's request?
He didn't know the word no.
Right. And well, he would want to schedule his appointments around his family's commitments, wouldn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
So like if the Buster and Paul had baseball season, he'd be sure to block all that out off his calendar, wouldn't he?
Most of the time. Sometimes he didn't tell us about personal matters or things where they were going until the day of or whatever, and we would have to reschedule stuff. But if it was on the calendar, yes, he was going to be there for anything that the boys had going on.
He put in his work life family first. Is
Yes,
that right?
that's correct.
You would agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that.
And you got to know Maggie, did
I
you
did.
not?
Yes, sir.
And she was thoughtful for you on your birthday and anything you had going on?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think you mentioned the Ferris trial in Columbia. That was in Columbia, wasn't it?
That was, yes, sir.
And you went to the trial, didn't you?
I did.
And you remember Alec going up on a Sunday, and he spent the night in the hospital because his dad was going to have surgery the next day?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it seems like it's been a
And
long
then-
time, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Maggie came up on Monday and stayed with him during the trial, right?
I never did see her. Our paths never crossed because I was kind of in work mode, but I know she was there.
Right. And he traveled frequently with Maggie on work trips, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
And he would take his family to conventions and when they would have work, right?
As far as I know, yes, sir.
And Alec wasn't the type of guy that would go off on a guy's trip. His trips were family trips.
I mean, I don't know that without a shadow of a doubt, but I know a lot of his trips were family related, something with him and Maggie, or him and Maggie and the boys and their significant others.
Right. And he was real close with Maggie's family too, wasn't he?
Yes, it appeared that they were very close.
And if Mr. Brandstatter's, Maggie's dad, couldn't get in touch with Alec on his cell phone, he would call you and ask, where's Alec?
Yeah, he would call myself or Christy and say, hey, can you get Alec to give me a call? Yeah,
And they communicated quite frequently, didn't
they did.
they? And did you meet Mr. and Ms. Brenstetter?
I didn't meet him until, we had Mr. Randolph he got the, what
Order
was
of the
it?
Palmetto?
Yeah, and that's when I met them. That was the first time I'd ever met Maggie's parents.
The, and if Alec was in even a deposition, and if Maggie or Paul or Buster would call, I mean, he would walk out and take the call, wouldn't he?
I never was present with them. I've heard rumors of such, but I was never present with him at depositions and mediations.
Well, in the office, if he was in a meeting, he would always take their calls, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. Yes.
Never say, oh, gosh, tell her I'd call her back. He'd
No,
take the call.
he never put off calls with his family. He always talked to them.
Now, you were talking about the night that you learned that Maggie and Paul were murdered, that you thought when you first got the call that it was about Mr. Randolph.
Correct.
And we're talking about Mr. Randolph murder,
That's correct.
Alex and Randy's dad,
Yes, sir.
because it was well known that he had just been put back in the hospital and his condition was not well.
Yeah, it was my understanding that at that point, the family was making arrangements to bring him home, and hospice may be involved. And so, obviously, we were all expecting awful news.
And he, in fact, did die on Thursday, June 10th, I believe.
I believe so, too. Yes, sir.
And after that, you said that, the whole law firm rallied around not just Alec, but Alec and Randy and their families.
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's
And we
what,
rallied around each other because we were scared. We were worried.
right. And then after, well, I guess there was like a tidal wave of media surrounding the law firm at some point in time, wasn't there?
Yes, sir.
And so y'all had to, be careful with comings and goings, and that was kind of scary, I think.
It was. We ended up having to lock the front door because they would just walk in and just overwhelm the receptionist. So it became like a daily habit there for a few weeks. So we had to end up locking the door.
And as a result of Maggie and Paul's tragic murder, Alex Murdaugh became front and center of a media spotlight, didn't he?
He did, yes, sir.
And it wasn't, and there were cameras outside the office frequently, right?
There were, yes, sir.
And there were cameras out at Moselle.
I think so. I didn't go out there, but I'm assuming they probably were.
And all the buzz was about Alex Murdaugh and what happened to Maggie and Paul, right?
Yes, sir.
And all the while you were around Alec on occasion, and you noticed his demeanor, and he was grieving greatly, was he not?
He was grieving, and he was also very humble. He had changed dramatically. Afterwards, he was more mellow, and he would come in the mornings, and instead of yelling Christy, Annette, and telling us what to do, he would actually come to our desk and say hello and check on us, and we would in turn check on him. So he was very different after the murders.
And he had a hard time working after the murders?
Absolutely, yeah, as you could imagine.
Sure. And you're aware, you had to keep up with his whereabouts, but he spent a lot of time with Maggie and Maggie's parents?
Yeah, he would tell me that he had weekend plans, and I would hear him on the phone with his in-laws and making plans to meet up for the weekend.
And he stayed in Somerville a good bit with Buster, with Maggie's parents?
As far as I know, yes, sir.
And he and Buster traveled up to the upstate, to Lake Huey or something? Are you aware of that?
I remember him saying, the family had had property or something up there, his in-laws, and they were all getting together.
And you're aware that Alec would not spend a single night after Maggie and Paul were murdered at Moselle.
Yes, sir, I knew that.
And when he was working in Hampton, he was either commuting from Somerville, Edisto, or staying with his brother Randy, or something like that.
I knew he was either staying with family or, you know, he was coming back from Somerville or Greenville from being with the in-laws, but that's all I knew.
But he never spent one night more at Moselle.
Not as far as I know, yes, sir.
Now, you were asked questions by Mr. Waters about the Ferris matter was the furthest thing from your mind after the murder of Maggie and Paul, right?
Yes, sir.
And that you didn't do any more about that after Maggie and Paul's murder, right?
That's correct.
But I think you also said that you conveyed your concerns to Jeannie Seconder, and that she essentially took over.
Yes, when I gave it to her, I knew she told me she would take it from there. And so I know I gave it to her, and that was that.
And so there's really nothing more for you to do on the Ferris matter after you turned it over to Jeannie, right?
Correct.
And then you were in this Alex's office one day looking for a file, and you stumbled across this canceled check.
Yes, sir. It must have been underneath the file. I wanted in between that and something else. So when I lifted my file, it fluttered to the floor.
And and you felt, I think you talked to this jury about how this whole thing put you in a bad spot, and your daughter said you need to dust your resume off or something like that.
That's
right?
correct. Yes, sir. I was worried. I was hoping I was wrong. I was hoping that my gut feeling was wrong and that what I was looking at was not money being stolen and that he was not doing that. I was hoping I was wrong, but at the same time, I was scared to turn it in because what if they, look into it and it's nothing, there's nothing going on, and then, it disturbs the relationship we had working together, and, what would I do? Would I be able to stay at the firm after turning him in on something so bad that he could lose his job over it? So I was concerned. I was concerned for my livelihood. I'm a single mom with a teenage daughter.
And nothing happened to your job, right?
No, sir. Nothing happened to my job.
It's Alec who lost his job, right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And you mentioned in what's in the evidence as defendant's exhibit number 441 is a text that you received from Alec, right?
That's correct.
And was it just to you, or was it you and
Me and Christy, his other
Christy,
secretary.
the other secretary? And the date is Sunday, September 26th at 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yes, sir.
And you mentioned it was from rehab.
Yes, as far as I knew, it was rehab. I assumed it was probably one of the steps of reaching out to those that you hurt and telling them you're sorry.
And Alec was in rehab?
Yes, sir. As far as I know, he was.
Okay. And I want you to read this to the jury, the whole email, if you don't mind,
Okay,
please.
sure. Hey, it's Alec. I'm finally feeling a little better each day. I'm over the worst, but still feel like I have the flu. Real weak. I have been worried about y'all, and I'm sorry I didn't get to tell y'all myself. I know both of you been hurt badly by me. I know it sounds hollow, but I am truly sorry. The better I get, the more guilt I have. I have an awful lot to try to make right when I get out of here. The worst part is knowing I did the most damage to those I love the most. I'm not real sure how I let myself get where I did. I'm committed to getting better and hope to mend as many relationships as I can. You both are special people and important to me. Please know how sorry I am to have made you part of my misdeeds. I hope you are doing as well as possible. I love you very much. Please tell Cheryl and Haley hello, and I'm sorry. All my love.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Anything further?
Very quickly, Your Honor. Mr. Griffin asked you about whether or not you were worried about losing your job over these Ferris fees. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then he asked you, the defendant lost his job, right?
That's correct.
After the murders, but before September, the defendant still had his job, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He still had his law license, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
You said, in response to defense counsel's question, that people came to him if they needed something, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. He was trusted by everybody, and they knew that if they needed something, all they had to do was reach out, and he was going to help them.
He was trusted by everybody. Did you trust him?
I trusted him. Yes, sir.
The people came to him for anything, like all these clients right here?
Yes, sir.
He was a prominent lawyer,
Yes, he was.
one of the most prominent in the region.
Yes.
And all of that came to an end in September 2021 when all of that came out, did it not?
Right. When I found the check, I knew that he had lied to me and that he'd stolen that money.
Thank you. You may step down. You may call your next witness.
Johnny James for the state. State calls Michael Gunn.
Mr. Gunn.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You have a seat on the stage. Just that microphone, address your seat. Just state your name again and spell your last name, please.
Sure. It's Michael Gunn. Last name is spelled G-U-N-N.
Morning, Mr. Gunn.
Good morning.
Just barely morning. Where are you from, Mr. Gunn?
From Columbia.
Born and raised?
Oh, grew up in Conway, South Carolina.
Oh, grew up in Conway, South Carolina.
Yes, sir.
All right. Where you work?
Work for Forge Consulting.
And what is Forge Consulting?
Forge Consulting, we are a settlement planning firm based primarily in Atlanta. I run the Columbia or South Carolina office, and we work with people, plaintiffs and plaintiffs' attorneys, to help them really try to take the settlements that have been recovered for them and try to make them make these settlements last a long time. These people normally have been in catastrophic injuries or wrongful death of a loved one.
So your company works with law firms who represent people who've been hurt, and if they get a little bit of money to make them whole, you can help make that money last a longer time. Is that an accurate summary of what you just described?
Yes, sir, and that's the goal.
All right. When did you first start working for Forge Consulting, or do you work for Forge Consulting, or did you found it?
I'm one of the principals in Forge Consulting. We started in 2003. I've been there since 2005.
And what is your actual, you said you're a principal, what is your actual title at Forge Consulting?
I would be a principal and settlement consultant.
Okay. And so do you work directly with the attorneys yourself in arranging some of these settlements and structures and things of that nature?
Yes, sir, I do.
So if you could, what exactly is a structured settlement in a summary form?
Sure, kind of a primer on it. Essentially, a structured settlement is when it's only available to those who've been, first of all, to those who've been injured or involved in a wrongful death or workers' compensation. It's really a method for them to try and save money. And what I mean by that is when they get the settlement, they have an opportunity to put some of that money into almost like an annuity. And that annuity would pay them over time, much like a paycheck, because a lot of these folks have lost their jobs, they've lost a loved one, or they have bills to pay. And so by doing that, it allows them to receive that money, but not only do they receive the funds, they do receive them tax-free from the federal government.
Totally tax-free?
Totally tax-free, with interest.
Now, who actually funds these annuities that ultimately get paid out to those who've been hurt?
Sure. Well, generally speaking, the annuities are funded by the insurance company that's paying the claim or the defendant themselves. That's generally speaking.
And when they pay that claim, where does that money go in order to fund the annuity? Does it go to Forge Consulting?
The only way it would go to Ford's Consulting is if the check was made payable to that insurance company, and then we would forward the check on to that insurance company.
So in that instance, you wouldn't actually be really taking the money, you'd just be stuffing it in an envelope
We'd be a
and
mail
sending it on?
carrier. We'd just be a mail carrier, correct.
And I apologize, we're both speaking pretty quickly here. Madam Court Reporter can only record one of us at a time, so if I'm asking a question, try and let me complete it and then answer
No problem.
thereafter.
Yep.
So to clarify, the only instance where you would get any money is if the check is made out to an insurance company, you stuff it in another envelope and send it on its way.
That's correct.
But ultimately, the money comes from the insurance company to whoever's funding this annuity. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, yes.
And the people funding this annuity would be another insurance company or some other firm of that nature. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that would be the structuring of monies awarded in a lawsuit to the person hurt. What about monies awarded to the lawyer in a lawsuit? What about an attorney's fees? Can those be structured?
They can be.
All right. And how does that process work?
It's a very similar process. It's then a similar outcome. The difference is the attorneys would be deferring it, but when they receive the funds, they would have to pay the tax at that time. But it is a way to defer the taxes like that. But it's the same scenario. The money would have to come from the defendant and/or its insurance carrier, and there would also have to be language included in settlement documents, et cetera.
But it couldn't come directly to the attorney, could it?
No, sir. That would be constructive receipt, and the IRS would consider that taxable income.
Constructive receipt, and they would consider it taxable income. So, can you explain that just a little bit more for me?
Well, if they receive the money, then the IRS is going to consider that taxable at the time it hits their account, and therefore undoing that is going to be quite a bit of a problem.
And so then they would get taxed on all of that money, correct?
That is correct.
As opposed to just the amount of money that they wanted to get that year.
That is correct.
And you indicated that it would be deferred taxation. So to use an example, let's say I represent somebody on a big suit and get $1 million in attorney's fees. If I were to structure it, I could have that stretched out over 10 years, $100,000 a year, and then, am I hearing it correctly? I wouldn't get taxed on $1 million all at once. I would get taxed on that $100,000 a year each year for those next 10 years. Is that a good way of describing it?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Okay. And as a result, pay less in taxes.
That's the goal.
Are you familiar with an individual by the name of Richard Alexander Murdaugh?
I am.
Do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you point him out for me?
Wearing a checked shirt and a blue jacket, it appears.
Let the record show that he identified Mr. Murdaugh. When did you first meet Mr. Murdaugh?
Probably 20 years ago, give or take a few years, 20 years ago. Probably at a convention or a continuing education seminar, since our primary market are plaintiffs' attorneys. And
what was your first impression of Mr. Murdaugh?
Very jovial, friendly. Never met a stranger. Just a generally nice guy.
Did you have occasion to work with Mr. Murdaugh more going forward from that point in time?
I did. As generally speaking, as we get to know our clients, a lot of times friendships get born out of that, and you get more comfortable dealing with them. And so yes, I worked with his firm a great deal. Did a lot of work with his firm. I probably actively would work. I'd worked probably 5 cases with Mr. Murdaugh.
Now, in terms of those at his firm, did you work with Alec on a lot of cases or relatively few cases compared to his partners?
If you compare it to his partners, relatively few.
So most of the time you were working with the other folks at PMPED, but Alec maybe just a handful of times. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did Alec hold any other positions other than his role at the law firm that caused you to work with one another frequently?
Sure. At one time, he was the president of the Association for Justice, which is a voluntary organization of plaintiffs' attorneys. And so we'd be very closely together at trial lawyer events and things of that nature, CLEs.
And is there a shorthand for that organization that used to be applied to it? The
SCAJ.
SCAJ. As part of your professional relationship with Alec, what sorts of things would y'all do together?
Again, usually these would be at events. It was never really a one-off. It was usually events. Golf, dinner, lunch, things like that. Just things that you would do. Things that you would do when you're at a Hilton Head.
About how many times would you say you golf together?
I'd probably say I'd put the over-under around 15.
15?
Yeah.
And you'd go have dinner, maybe some drinks together at the conference, correct?
Not every year, but we would see each other. But, dinner was probably few and far between.
Did you ever go hang out with Mr. Murdaugh at Moselle or any of his other properties?
No, sir.
Did he ever come and hang out with you in Columbia for dinner or drinks or anything like that?
It would be business related.
Did you ever go to any sporting events with him, like a Gamecocks football game or anything like that?
I never went with him. I may have seen him there, but never went with him, no.
There's a lot of folks in the stadium at Williams-Brice
Quite a
on
few.
game day.
Depending on the season.
Did Mr. Murdaugh ever meet you in Columbia and deliver some checks to you and tell you, hey, these are for the clients for structures or anything like that?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever meet with him halfway between Columbia and Hampton and get checks from him?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever call him and say, hey, can you bring those checks to me so that we can finance this?
Absolutely not.
And would Forge, under any circumstances, accept client money checks personally in order to fund an annuity for them?
No, sir.
And so if you received or saw or reviewed an instrument made out to Forge and it said in the memo line, money for client or something to that effect, would that instrument be legit?
Well, it would be returned to the person that sent it to us with an explanation as to why we could not take it.
You would not take it?
No, we would not take it.
In working with Mr. Murdaugh, did you ever discuss options with him about how to structure fees for his clients?
Generally speaking, we have those conversations with attorneys, and I do remember he inquired about it, kind of went through what you would need to do, how you would need to do it, kind of the process in which it's done. So yes.
So did you explain to him some of the things that we've explained to these folks from around the county here today?
It's the same canned elevator speech I give to everyone. This is the mechanics of how it works.
Were there any specific cases that he came to you and asked you about whether you could set up a structure?
I don't recall if there was a specific case. I do remember there was a case where we sent some options over one time and nothing ever came to fruition. It was just, here's what you can do.
Do you recall the name Dion Martin?
I do recall the name Dion Martin.
What, if anything, do you recall about Dion Martin? Was that one of Alex's cases?
It was. What I recall about that case is that I got a signed option from plaintiff's counsel, signed by Mr. Dion Martin, or I'm assuming Mr. Martin, saying he wanted to set aside X amount of dollars. Not really sure exactly what that amount was. And he wanted to do it to an annuity. And so annuities, like anything, it's kind of based off of stock market and whatnot, so they can kind of go up and down. So there's a time window in which you are able to purchase that. If not, the rate may go up, the rate may go down. And so I consistently sent emails to Mr. Murdaugh as well as his paralegal, Annette Griswold. I would say at least 4, maybe 5 emails saying, hey, this is going to expire. This is going to expire if you don't fund this now. And after getting no response, after multiple weeks, we just closed our file.
So you did open a file for Mr. Martin, correct?
We open a file for every case, yes.
For every case, and I want to drill onto that a little bit. What prompts you to open a file?
Well, part of it is so that we can remember if the attorney calls us and says, hey, I've got a case I'm about to start working on, or we got it, and they don't give us any information because they might be in the car, we can say, okay, this is the John Smith case, and I've got that tied to an attorney. And so that's how we do that.
So if you get so much as a phone call saying, I want to talk to you about so-and-so, you make a file?
That is correct.
Even if it's just one conversation?
I always ask for a name.
Do you ask for any other information?
I asked for a great deal of information, but oftentimes that takes a little while to get. But the name is what I need first.
Are you aware of a boat collision that occurred in early of 2019 in relation to Mr. Murdaugh or his family?
I'm aware.
And are you aware of generally any litigation that resulted from that case?
I'm aware.
After that boat crash and that litigation began, did you have any further conversations with Mr. Murdaugh about structuring any fees that he might earn?
We had general conversations, generic conversations, but we never had any in-depth conversations.
They never asked any specifics beyond the general canned speech?
It was, this is what you can do, and this is what you can't do.
Did he ever bring you any fees and say, hey, I would like to structure these or anything to that effect?
No, sir.
Do you recall in and around September of 2021, receiving a phone call from Lee Cope?
I do.
And what generally, well, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Mr. Cope called me, asked me if he could trust me, asked if he could trust my office as much as he trusted me, let me rephrase that, and said, I'd like to give you a name of some cases, and could you tell me what y'all have done for those clients? He gave me probably 10 to 12 names. I remember I was standing in my driveway, so I'm furiously writing down these names, hoping I could read my own handwriting. And I got back with Mr. Cope and told him I didn't have a file open on any of these people.
None of them?
Not a one.
Not a single name that he provided to you?
No, sir.
Did they follow up with you and provide you any additional names?
They did. The next day, he called me again, gave me another list of names, went through that list. The only name that stood out was Dion Martin that I referenced earlier.
Did they ask you about where Forge Consulting did its banking?
They asked me if we banked at Bank of America, and I told them we had not for the last 4 years.
Was it the last 4 years, or was it a little bit longer than that?
It was 4 to 5 years, somewhere in that range.
I jumped ahead a little bit. You are generally aware of the events of June 7th, 2021. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I am.
When did you first become aware of the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh?
Probably early morning on June 8th, probably 5:36 in the morning. I got a couple of phone calls, a couple of missed phone calls.
What did you do after learning of the murders?
Other than being stunned by it all, I let my wife know, called a few other people. I let my business partners know.
Did you reach out to anybody in relation to Mr. Murdaugh or Mr. Murdaugh himself?
I did reach out to one or two of his law partners just to express my condolences, and obviously asked to hope it wasn't true, but that was confirmed. And then I waited a day and reached out to Mr. Murdaugh and just let him know we were thinking of him, didn't have the words for what to say.
Had you ever met Paul or Maggie?
I have.
Did you know Paul very well?
I didn't know Paul very well. I knew of him, but I didn't know him very well.
How well did you know Maggie?
I knew Maggie, pretty well. She would oftentimes, I believe when Buster was in school in Columbia, she would text me and ask me where he could get his hair cut and where he could get his pants hemmed and things like that. And I was kind of like her local Google. So, but it was funny because I'd always respond to her.
You're in Columbia, Buster's in Columbia, she's in Hampton, and so she's texting you with questions.
Absolutely.
Did you attend the funeral for Paul and Maggie?
I did.
Did you see Alec there?
I did.
Did he say anything to you?
Not at the funeral, but after.
Did you go to a wake afterwards?
I did.
Did he say anything to you at the wake?
he told me how much Maggie had loved me and my wife and our family.
Between that wake and September of 2021, did you see the defendant, Mr. Murdaugh, on any other occasions?
I saw him in Hilton Head in August. That was the only time I saw him.
Where did you see him?
At the SCAGE conference in Hilton Head Island, the annual convention. That's all attorneys and vendors and whatnot attend.
At the lawyers' convention in
Yes.
Hilton Head?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Oh. Was anybody with him?
His brother John Marvin was with him primarily, but others were around. Law firm members of the firm.
What was the scope of your interactions with Mr. Murdaugh at the convention?
We hung out a little bit, or said, exchanged pleasantries, hugs. Still, couldn't believe what had happened, and we did go to dinner. I went to dinner with him, his brother, and the majority. I don't want to count them off of his law firm on. I believe it was Saturday evening.
Now, we've talked about Forge Consulting. Are there any subsidiaries of Forge Consulting or alternative names or other companies associated with Forge?
We do have two other companies that are under the Forge umbrella. One is Advocacy Trust, which is a trust company, and another one is Advocacy Wealth Management, which manages it's a vendor and SEC-related wealth management firm.
Do you have any subsidiary? Excuse me, stumbling over my own tongue. Do you have any subsidiaries that are just named Forge?
No, sir, we do not.
Did you ever tell Mr. Murdaugh that he could use the name of Forge Consulting or Forge for his own purposes?
Absolutely not.
Prior to September of 2021, did you have any knowledge that Mr. Murdaugh was using the name of Forge for his own purposes?
No, sir.
Beg my own court's indulgence.
I'll stand for a moment. All right, come to order.
Showing you a document already in evidence as State's Exhibit 335. This document says it's a Bank of America statement. Is this an account statement from a Forge Consulting account?
No, sir, it is not.
35 on the Elmo for the Jersey at Richard A. Murdaugh, Sole Prop, DBA Forge. That's not one of your accounts?
No, sir.
No further questions for this witness.
By the defense.
Good afternoon.
You had some formal positions with the South Carolina Association of Justice?
Yes, sir.
What were those?
Did some government affairs lobbying work for them.
Okay, you on a contract basis?
As an employee and as a contractor.
Okay. And at one point in time, Alex Murdaugh was the president of the South Carolina SCAJ?
Yes, sir, he was.
And were you employed at the time or contract lobbyist?
Yes, sir, I was employed at the time, yes, sir.
And part of his duties, well, I guess he was on the board for a period of time as well, right?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And the SCAJ board and the president would meet in Columbia quarterly, monthly, how often?
They would meet in Columbia probably twice a year. They normally met at the convention spots or the CLE spots, and then one was always by telephone. But usually the president was, even the telephone call, the president would come to Columbia.
And when he would come to Columbia, you remember Maggie would come with him and spend the night on those business trips?
Sometimes, yeah. I don't know specifically for that for the Skage stuff, but I do. Maggie spend the night in Columbia, yes.
But you saw them traveling together in Columbia. I mean, you said you would see him in Columbia on business reasons. Was the business reasons his membership on the board and then?
I would say, generally speaking, most of the time when I would see him, it would be because of that, yes, sir.
Okay. And then he and Maggie came to you and your wife's wedding in New York, right?
They did.
And my understanding is the big day came on the day of a big blizzard.
3 feet of snow, yes, sir.
And so you had to delay the wedding a day, right?
We did.
And you got to spend a lot more time with Maggie and Alec in that period of time?
All the other guests, yes, sir.
Right. And so at that point in time, your wife became friends with Maggie, and y'all became pretty good social friends?
I think so. I mean, we still didn't really hang out much after the wedding other than professional settings, and that could have been just because of the distance between the towns. But, yeah, we keep in touch, no doubt.
And then every year, I think you mentioned, there's an annual convention at Hilton Head of the, we used to call it trial lawyers, but...
I still do, too.
Yeah. Of the trial lawyers, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's usually at a hotel. It used to be at the Westin at Port Royal, I think.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
I think maybe they moved it. I don't know.
Marriott now.
Yeah. So, and there would be seminars, during the day, and then there'd be socializing in the evenings.
Yes, sir.
And it was a family event.
Very much so.
And Alec would bring Maggie and Paul and Buster.
Every time.
And you got to see him interact with his entire family.
I did.
And he was a family man, wasn't he?
By all accounts, yes, sir.
And you went to Maggie and Paul's funeral?
Yes, sir, I did.
And then after the funeral, you went out to Moselle?
Yes, sir.
And I'm sure, what was Alec's demeanor?
He was a broken man. You could tell. He was very upset. He was very upset.
And then you saw him a few months later at that convention at Hilton Head?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you said he was with his brother John Marvin?
Yes, sir.
And his son Buster was there too. You remember
I believe that's correct, yes, sir.
Now, John Marvin's not a lawyer, right?
He's not.
Is it unusual for John Marvin to come to the lawyer convention?
I had not seen him before, no, at the convention, no.
Right. He was there supporting his brother?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And people were trying to lift Alex's spirits up and support him during that period of time?
I think so, yes, sir.
All right. 1 second,
Thank you, sir. Call your next witness.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. If you'll have a seat on the stand. If you'll state your name, just that microphone there, and spell your last name for the record.
Brian Hudak, Hudak.
Agent Hudak, how are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Where are you employed?
South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, also known as SLED.
All right, and what is your duties there?
I'm a special agent in computer crimes.
All right, and just briefly, what do your duties entail? If the,
Conduct forensic examinations, cell phones, computers, vehicle infotainment modules, any sort of electronic device that can hold evidence. Also, I'm an evidence custodian for the unit.
Just a moment, sir. I have the jury go to the jury room for a recess. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to evacuate the building at this time, so we'll be in recess until we discover what's going on. We'll couple this with a lunch break until 2:30.
saying somebody needs to be on air right now. Neither of them have ISP.
And what we were doing was to supplement the air monitoring that EPA and we are already doing, was to do that inside the homes as well, so we can verify that any of the chemicals that we are in relation to the rain drill, to see if those are inside the home and if the homes might be safe to be occupied.
Neither reporters have an ISP. One of you two is hot on Facebook Live.
Suspect accused of stealing monkeys from the Dallas Zoo.
Do they not want me in this hit or what? Nick's grabbing his ISP. I mean, I can hear him, but he's not going to hear him talk back. Here comes Nick. He's coming. Sounds like he wants to do this, so. Yeah. Say again? Okay. Nick is coming. Stand by. Are you an ISB?
Will come in
Cool.
finance and human resources.
Who's going here? They want it. Do you want this go? Yeah. All right. You got a mic check? It's fine. I'll have him talk to me. I'll bring you in. Okay, give him a mic check, please. Mic check. 1, 2, 3.
I handed you your IFA.
Take a step back.
Taxes for some workers that often don't report some income. The tax collection agency has proposed a tip reporting program.
Well, with our mix. Nick, stand by. Good afternoon to you, Intisar. And this happened just several moments ago. We were evacuated from the Colleton County Courthouse. Pretty much all personnel inside the courthouse, those testifying, those in the jury box, those on the witness stand, the judge, and also the defendant himself, Alex Murdaugh, and his family led out of the courtroom as all of this happened. It happened about 15 minutes ago, and in the meantime, as you can see behind me, this area is being cordoned off. We have law enforcement personnel that are here. All of the media that was staging here has been directed to get out of the area and to cross the street. So why did this happen? Well, we're not exactly sure at this time. We're working to figure that out. But Judge Newman from the bench, as a forensic analyst with SLED, a computer analyst, was about to testify. He essentially called a recess saying that the building was being evacuated. He didn't give any further information. He didn't talk about any threat or anything like that, although we have heard rumors of something like that. We're working to get that confirmed. We don't want to put that out there until we know exactly what happened. But suffice it to say, in a situation like this, when you see law enforcement scrambling like they were just to get us out of the area, clearly there's something that they feel is potentially a danger here at this courthouse. So all of the media has been staged across the street. Everyone kind of ran into place here to try to get an idea as we work our sources to figure out what possibly prompted all of this. I'm going to bring in our Nick Neville here, who's standing by as well, as we work to kind of move from where we were across the scene. We saw several things, Nick, and let's go ahead and bring you into this shot as we figure out exactly what's going on. Because, Nick, we saw in the midst of all of this, we saw the Attorney General leave. We also saw the Murdaugh family leave. They put Alex Murdaugh in what looked like the vehicle that he arrives in, which is a Colleton County van, and they drove him out with a law enforcement escort. So we don't know if he's going to be back anytime soon. But Nick, suffice it to say, this has been a pretty frantic 10 minutes.
Right, absolutely, Greg. So a lot of confusion here. Of course, as we heard testimony this morning, more testimony about Alex's alleged financial crimes. We were just starting to hear from that SLED computer crimes expert. Judge Newman came to the bench and basically made this announcement that we had to evacuate the courthouse. He did not provide any reasoning or any further details as to exactly what happened. Greg and I were in the media center at that time, which is basically across the street from the courthouse. And as I was scrambling to basically see more of exactly what was going on, I noticed Buster Murdaugh crossing the street with a deputy, along with Alex Murdaugh's brother, John Marvin. They were being escorted to the left back, and we assume in the vehicle that they came in to leave. We also, of course, as you noted, Greg, we saw Alex Murdaugh, his car leaving. We're assuming he's headed back to the Colleton County Jail at this time. Another thing to note, Judge Newman announced that we're expecting court to resume at 2:30. That's, of course, what he said about 15 minutes ago. It's unclear if that is still going to happen. Of course, as Greg and I were also walking up on the grounds of the courthouse, we were told by law enforcement to get across the street. As you mentioned, they're trying to section everybody off, get them to a safe location as they try to determine exactly what was going on here. But of course, really sort of a startling development to see, the crowd of folks ushered out of the courthouse. Unclear where the jury is stationed at this point, but of course, the safety of everyone here, spectators, a top priority, especially given we've been seeing just a flood of people from all over the country come here to the Colleton County Courthouse to witness this historic trial. And we saw earlier this morning, about an hour before court resumed at 9:30, long lines of people, so long, in fact, that there were actually a number of overflow folks who had arrived to just sort of be spectators and watch the trial. Those folks had been in the media center as well. So a full courtroom, everyone filing out. Greg and I took some video that hopefully we can get to you shortly of folks filing out of the courthouse about 10 minutes ago. But of course, as you also mentioned, Greg, we've been hearing reports, rumors, different things of exactly what's going on. We don't want to put any of that out there until we get some more confirmed information. But as of right now, the testimony that we were hearing sort of seems to, of course, take a back seat.
It certainly does, as this situation continues to unfold. And really what this is kind of pointing to is just it's a high-profile trial, clearly, a lot of eyes on this trial, and it just adds another layer of intrigue to this trial, just an abrupt stopping of proceedings right before lunchtime here at the Colleton County Courthouse. Judge Newman saying that the courthouse has to be evacuated again during testimony this morning that focused primarily on financial crimes that Alex Murdaugh is alleged to have committed. But just an abrupt stopping like this and everyone being ordered out of the courtroom, it's already somewhat of a heightened and tense situation whenever you're talking about testimony like this in a high-profile trial, for it to be just stopped on a dime. And all of a sudden, everybody watching this, from the gallery in the courtroom to the media, as well as all of the participants in this trial, we saw the Attorney General, Alan Wilson, as well as the defense lawyers making their way out here. One of the complexities, too, as you're watching people file out of the Colleton County Courthouse, was that we didn't necessarily want to show any faces because, after all, they could be jurors. And one of the directives in this case from Judge Newman is that the identities of these jurors cannot be disclosed in any way by the media because, after all, it could compromise the integrity of this trial. And so that was one of the complexities that we're wrestling with as all of this was happening. We're taking videos and whatnot. We don't necessarily know who we're shooting at that point on video. So you have to keep those types of things in mind as you're reporting on something like this. But in the meantime, our setup that is just right over my shoulder here, you can see it's blocked off right now by 2 law enforcement vehicles, and everyone has been moved out of that area. It's an area where all of the media has staged here over these past several days. Media outlets like ourselves, as well as others, have all of our equipment set up in that area, and so really this was a quick operation to get up and be able to bring you this information live. But what we can tell you is that court is in recess here for at least the next hour and a half to 2 hours perhaps. Could be even longer than that as we try to determine what exactly caused this abrupt stopping in this trial. This basically the courtroom being evacuated and the courthouse being evacuated as onlookers and everyone else is across the street working and searching to get more information. Nick brought up an important point. We've been saying it off the top of this broadcast. We're not going to say exactly what it was because we don't yet know if it was anything like a threat that was phoned in or anything like that. Although, Nick, you may have some new information in being able to kind of gather that in just the last few minutes.
Right. Right. So we do have some new information to share with you just in the last few moments. I'm going to step out so you can get a clearer view of the situation right now with law enforcement sort of patrolling the area. We have this just into the WIS newsroom. A bomb threat was received by Colleton County Courthouse personnel. The building has been evacuated and SLED, along with the Colleton County Sheriff's Office, are investigating this threat. So no additional information is available from SLED at this time. This, of course, coming from SLED. You can see law enforcement personnel patrolling the grounds here of the courthouse. So again, what we can confirm just in the last few minutes, a bomb threat was received to the Colleton County Courthouse just a few moments ago. And so that is the reason why we had to evacuate the courthouse and why this trial has now been put on hold. So.
Well, of course, we're going to continue to follow the very latest out here. Of course, they're vetting that bomb threat that was phoned in here. Authorities on the scene and making sure that everyone is safe, keeping us a safe distance away. I can tell you that just about 15 minutes ago, as we were working our way across the grounds, law enforcement was, they minced no words, telling us to get out of the area. They're taking this bomb threat incredibly seriously. As we mentioned, just because of the gravity of this trial, very intense trial, a lot of people with eyes on this, and certainly it's something where they want to make sure that the situation is completely safe and making sure that the area is clear. Obviously, as this bomb threat was phoned in just a short time ago. We're going to be on this, and we'll bring you the very latest on all of our platforms, WISTV.com. You can follow Nick Neville and I, Greg Adeline, on Twitter. And also, we can bring you updates throughout the day online and in our later newscasts. But that's the latest from out here outside of the Colleton County Courthouse, which is now evacuated because of a bomb threat in the middle of the Murdaugh trial. I'm Greg Adeline. Let's send it back to you.